For most people, the city library was a place of silence and old books. But for Emily Hayes it was home. She had been working there for almost 6 years, quietly shelving, scanning, and cataloging thousands of dusty titles in the downtown building's labyrinth of shelves. It was a job that suited her. No small talk, no chaos. Just order. But on a rainy Thursday afternoon, everything changed. Emily was pushing her cart of returned books through the West Wing when she noticed something strange. Nestled between a yellowed dictionary and an outdated physics textbook was a thin, black notebook. There was no label, no call number, and no author's name. Just a worn leather cover with a strange symbol etched faintly into the corner. A triangle inside a circle. Curious, Emily flipped it open. The pages were filled with neatly handwritten code. Rows and rows of letters and numbers that made no immediate sense. But near the center of the journal, something odd caught her eye. A folded piece of paper had been tucked between the pages. She unfolded it and found what looked like a hand-drawn map of the library's basement. Except, the section it pointed to didn't exist. At least not on any blueprint she had ever seen. Emily hesitated. She wasn't the adventurous type. She preferred predictability. But something about the notebook tugged at her. Maybe it was the eerie quietness of the day, or the way the storm tapped against the old glass windows like a warning. Whatever it was, it pushed her to go downstairs. The basement of the library was off-limits to patrons, mostly used for old storage, decommissioned books, and broken microfilm readers. Emily knew the layout well, or thought she did, until she followed the map. Behind a shelf full of antique encyclopedias, partially hidden by a leaning ladder, she found something that shouldn't have been there. A door. Not one of the supply closets she was familiar with, but a tall iron one, covered in dust and rust. It had no handle, just a small lock embedded in its center. On the door, carved faintly, was a number, 0. She stared at it, then looked back at the map. The symbol from the notebook, triangle inside a circle, was drawn right over this spot. Emily kneeled to inspect the lock. Strangely, the code-filled journal had a loose page near the end with what looked like a numeric cipher. Decoding had always been a hobby of hers, something she used to do with her mother before she vanished when Emily was just 8 years old. Now it came back like muscle memory. She studied the cipher, matched it to the lock, and slowly turned the dial. Click. The door creaked open. Inside was a small room with flickering overhead lights. Metal shelves lined the walls, filled with manila folders and ancient-looking tapes. Dust danced in the air, illuminated by the blinking light above. It looked like a forgotten archive, except everything inside was marked with government seals and black ink stamps that read redacted. Emily's heart pounded. This wasn't ordinary library storage. She pulled a file off the shelf. It had no name, just a string of numbers and dates. Inside were photographs, medical records, psychological reports, child's face. Another file contained surveillance images, timestamps, and detailed notes about someone's movements. And then she saw it. A file labeled case #7392. H. Subject: Eleanor Hayes. Her mother. Emily's hands trembled as she opened it. There were photos of her mother, smiling, walking Emily to school, sitting at a cafe. Then came reports. Memory tests show positive results. Subject responds well to auditory triggers. Another page read, last seen near exit point. Surveillance lost contact August 11, 2004. The final photo was grainy, taken at night. Her mother was standing near the same iron door Emily had just unlocked. Suddenly, the lights flickered again. But this time they didn't come back. She froze. The hum of the fluorescent bulbs was replaced by silence. Then faintly she heard it, footsteps. Not hers. Someone was walking slowly across the concrete floor behind her. Emily's breath caught. She didn't have a weapon. No flashlight. Just the notebook and the folder. She slid the file into her bag, stuffed the journal back under her coat, and pressed herself against the shelves, barely breathing. The footsteps grew louder, deliberate. A shadow moved past the cracked doorframe. Whoever it was didn't speak. They just stood there waiting. Emily backed away carefully, trying not to make a sound. But her foot hit a small metal box on the floor. Clattered. The shadow moved. In a panic, she darted out the other side of the room, squeezing between two sets of shelves and finding a narrow hallway she didn't remember being there. At the end, she saw another staircase. Old, metal and rusting. Led upward. She didn't stop to think. Ran. By the time she reached the main floor, her hands were shaking and her clothes were damp with sweat. She slipped into the employee lounge, locked the door, and collapsed onto a chair. What had she just discovered? Who was that person? And why was her mother's file hidden in a sealed basement room? Emily had always believed her mother had simply walked out one night and never returned. That's what the police said. That's what the world believed. But now she wasn't so sure. She opened the notebook again and flipped to the last page. Scribbled in shaky handwriting were 6 words. Memory holds truth they can't erase. Eyes in the stacks. The next morning Emily arrived early, earlier than usual. The storm had passed, but the unease from the night before hadn't. She barely slept. Her dreams were scattered flashes of iron doors, flickering lights, and someone watching her from behind the stacks. She walked straight to the basement, but the iron door was gone. She blinked, confused. The shelf she'd moved had returned to its original position, now bolted to the wall. No dust trail. No faint outline. Just a wall of encyclopedias like it had always been. Emily stepped back in disbelief. She tapped the shelf. Solid. Had it all been some kind of hallucination? No. She still had the journal in her bag. Still had the folder labeled with her mother's name. That part was real. But someone had cleaned it up fast. She ran back upstairs and logged into the library's digital archives from her staff terminal. She typed Archive 0. No results. She searched the inventory logs. Nothing beyond standard storage. She even checked the blueprints of the building stored in the maintenance system. The area below the West Wing didn't even exist in the files. She was being erased. Or more accurately, the archive was. Emily reached into her bag and pulled out the journal again. She flipped to the cipher and started re-examining the numeric sequences. That's when she noticed a new pattern, one that hadn't registered before. The numbers were grouped in clusters that, when compared with the Dewey Decimal System, pointed to books in her own library's collection. She tested it with 792.702 RAV. Stage magic and misdirection. Another 153.42 MIT. Memory and the subconscious. It wasn't random. The cipher was guiding her to specific books, each connected by a theme: memory, illusion, deception. That afternoon she started collecting them. One by one she followed the codes, pulling books and flipping through them for clues. And then, inside a psychology textbook, she found it. A tucked note card with the same triangle and circle symbol and a handwritten message. He's watching. Trust no one. A cold wave rushed through her. She looked up instinctively, and there he was. The man she'd been seeing for the past week. Sitting in the far corner of the reading room. Always reading, always in the same spot. He looked unremarkable: khaki coat, glasses, average build. But now, with her heart pounding and the journal's warning echoing in her mind, he didn't look like a harmless bookworm. He looked like surveillance. When their eyes met, he smiled faintly, then looked away. Emily didn't wait. She grabbed her bag and rushed out the back exit, nearly colliding with a delivery man on the way out. She needed help, but she couldn't go to the police. Not when the files were clearly connected to something classified. Not when someone had scrubbed an entire room overnight. So she called the one person who might believe her. Marcus. Marcus Reed was a former cybersecurity consultant turned coffee shop barista after a breakdown and a lost job in Washington. Emily had met him during a trivia night 2 years ago. He had a knack for unraveling puzzles and an unhealthy obsession with conspiracy forums. "I know this is going to sound insane," she said when he picked up. "But I need to show you something." They met at a 24-hour diner on the edge of town. Emily brought the journal and the folder. Marcus listened without interrupting as she explained everything. Archive 0, the cipher, the hidden room, the man in the library. When she was done, Marcus leaned back, eyebrows raised. Okay. First off, if you're making this up, it's incredibly detailed. And if you're not making it up, then we're standing in something way over our heads. I'm not making it up. He nodded and opened the journal. These codes, they look military grade. Probably developed to avoid digital detection. If this Archive 0 thing existed, it wasn't part of any public-facing records. We're talking deep state. Emily pulled out the folder on her mother. She disappeared in 2004. I was 8. I've spent my whole life thinking she left us. But if this file is real... Marcus skimmed the pages, eyes narrowing. Memory induction. Behavioral training. Subject response to key phrases. This is next-level psych warfare. What does that mean? It means someone was experimenting on people. Implanting, removing, or rewriting memories. And based on these notes, your mom was part of it. But why was she there that night? Why was I listed in one of the files? Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he typed into his laptop and opened an old database archive. Watch this, he said, pulling up a classified government project list from the early 2000s. Most were heavily redacted, but one caught her attention. Project Mnemosyne, a psychological experiment targeting children with unusually strong memory retention. Participants were said to be living vaults, trained to store and forget classified information through subconscious encoding. Your mom didn't disappear, Marcus said. She was either taken or hiding. And you, if you were part of this, may have been trained to forget it all. Emily sat in stunned silence. She had always been able to recall tiny details. License plates, conversations, smells. Teachers called it a gift. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was programming. And this guy at the library, she asked. Probably your handler, Marcus said. Sent to keep tabs on you. Maybe to stop you if your memories start leaking back. Emily leaned in. Then we need to go back. Tonight. I want to find that room again, if it's still there. Are you sure? Marcus asked. If this really is a Black Ops program, they don't mess around. I have to. I need to know what's real. Marcus closed his laptop and nodded. Then let's break into your library. Redacted memories. Night had fallen, but the city library stood silent and imposing under the streetlights. Emily's heart hammered as she and Marcus crouched behind a row of hedges near the employee entrance. The air was thick with tension. Every shadow seemed to shift and move. Marcus checked his phone one last time. No security alerts triggered. He pulled a slim electronic device from his pocket and jammed it into the lock panel beside the door. After a few seconds of clicking and static, the lock disengaged with a soft beep. The door swung open. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of paper and mold. They moved quickly through the familiar corridors, until they reached the spot where Emily had found the iron door. Except this time it was no longer hidden. The door was open, revealing the dusty Archive 0. Shelves groaned under the weight of hundreds of redacted files, manila folders, and reels of magnetic tape. Emily's eyes scanned the rows like a hunter's. Marcus pulled a small flashlight from his bag and flicked it on. Look at this, he whispered, pointing to a metal cabinet labeled Project Mnemosyne. Subject files. Emily pulled open a drawer and found rows of files, each tagged with a number and a name. Her fingers trembled as she searched for her mother's. She found it. Eleanor Hayes, she whispered, pulling the folder free. Inside were detailed reports on her mother's psychological conditioning, audio transcripts of memory exercises, and clinical notes about emotional triggers. Suddenly, Marcus tapped a button on a battered VCR player sitting on a dusty table nearby. Found some tapes, he said. They inserted one and a grainy black and white video flickered to life on an old monitor. The footage showed a young Emily, no older than 6, sitting in a sterile room, her eyes wide but calm. A woman's voice spoke gently, repeating phrases. Repeat after me. You will forget what you don't need to remember. Emily's breath hitched. This was her, trained to erase her own memories. Suddenly the door behind them creaked. Emily spun around. A tall figure stepped through the shadows, her watcher from before. The man's face was impassive but his eyes were sharp. You shouldn't be here, he said calmly. I needed to know, Emily said, clutching her mother's folder. Who I really am. The man sighed. You were the final prototype, a living vault. The world isn't ready for what you can do. Emily's mind raced. If her memories were engineered, could she trust anything she remembered? But suddenly a phrase from the tape echoed in her head. Memory holds truth they can't erase. I remember everything now, she said firmly. Her eyes flashed with newfound strength. The man took a step forward, but Emily was faster. Deep in her mind was a hidden failsafe, a psychological trigger implanted to protect her if things went wrong. She whispered a code phrase she'd never spoken aloud before. The man froze, his expression flickering. Your mind belongs to no one, she said. Not anymore. With surprising agility, she pushed past him and bolted toward the stairs, dragging Marcus along. They burst out of the basement into the cool night air. Emily felt a strange lightness, like a veil lifting. Days later, Emily anonymously leaked the files from Archive Zero online. The truth about Project Mnemosyne spread quickly, exposing decades of government secrets and offering closure to families of the disappeared. Emily knew the road ahead was uncertain. But for the first time in years she felt free, armed not just with memories but with the truth.